Good morning, everyone. Before I call the meeting to order, I want to welcome some special guests. We have some visitors here from Nigeria this morning who are local government officials like us in Nigeria. So they are here to observe, grade us, and they will also be going on a tour of City Hall a bit later and then going back to the rest of their program. And so we welcome them and we hope you enjoy and find that we're following good governance. Now I will call the meeting to order. Welcome to the January 22nd, 2025 Executive Committee meeting. We acknowledge that we are on the traditional lands of the Treaty 4 territory, a treaty signed with 35 First Nations across southern Saskatchewan and parts of Alberta and Manitoba, and the original lands of the Cree, Saulteaux, Dakota, Nakota, Lakota, and on the homeland of the Métis Nation. The City of Regina owes its strength and vibrancy to these lands and the diverse Indigenous peoples whose ancestors' footsteps have marked this territory, as well as settlers from around the world who continue to be welcomed here and call Regina home. Some members of the committee and city administration are attending the meeting today through video conferencing. I would like to remind those members of the following. Please ensure that your video camera and microphone are turned off. If a member of committee wishes to speak, use the raise hand function to be placed into a speaking queue. When speaking, remember to unmute your microphone, enable your video camera, and all votes will be conducted with a recorded vote. Reports recommended for consideration by City Council will be considered at its meeting scheduled for January 29th, and the deadline to register as a delegation for the City Council meeting is 12 o'clock noon on Monday, January 27th. Can I have someone move a motion to approve the agenda at the call of the chair with the addition of the registered list of delegations? Thank you, Councillor Bizo. I will call the question. Any opposed? Carried. Can I have someone move a motion to adopt the minutes of the public meeting held on December 4th, 2024? Councillor Fro. Any errors or omissions? I will call the question. Any opposed? Carried.
Did you hit the screen?
Okay. I'm going to call upon delegation Ryan Johnson. Is Ryan here? Or oh, there he is. Okay. I believe you're aware to introduce yourself for the record, the organization you are representing, and where you live. I'll turn your mic on in just one moment. You'll have 5 minutes to address Executive Committee, after which you'll have the opportunity to respond to any questions that members may have for you. Please go ahead.
Good morning. I am Ryan Johnson, President and CEO of the Buffalo Pound Water Treatment Corporation, and I reside in Moose Jaw. Thank you, Madam Chair, Mayor Pashinsky, members of City Council, City Administration, members of the general public, and to start, I acknowledge that our facility and operations are located on Treaty 4 lands. I am very pleased to report on the highlights of the corporation's operations for the first half of 2024. The corporation met all regulatory requirements and criteria for production of safe drinking water and met its obligations under a unanimous membership agreement with the cities of Regina and Moose Jaw. Financially, on a cash basis, the corporation is forecasting an operating deficit of $370,000, most of which is from water sales that were below target by about $900,000. But there were some savings in reduced chemical utility costs of about $534,000, and our year-end operating reserve is estimated to be around $900,000. Our capital projects are either completed or remain in progress, and the corporation is following both of its environmental and corporate strategic plans. We have a brand new 1.8 megawatt AC solar system, which has been operating since August. All of our electrical power is now green, either from on-site generation through solar or through off-site through SAS Power. The plant renewal project will reduce our corporation's carbon footprint by building to LEED standard as well as Envision and using energy-efficient construction and retrofits with modern equipment. The corporation has adopted a 2-year budget cycle which aligns to the City of Regina. In 2025-26 operating budgets, we developed a status quo budget with adjustments due to the plant renewal project and inflationary impacts, as well as water sales forecasts were adjusted downwards as the cities have not been purchasing as much water in the last 3 years. A large increase in 2025 was known for several years as part of the implementation of the plant renewal project, with many of the new processes coming online this year, which had cost implications. The total cost of water is 76 cents per cubic meter in 2024. For 2025, the total increase is 7.4 cents per cubic meter and 3.5 cents per cubic meter in 26. This represents an annual increase of about $27 per household in 25 and about $12.60 in 2026. The cost of water from Buffalo Pound is about 35% of what the city consumers pay of the $2.40 the city charges. After plant renewal, once the actual costs to operate are known, adjustments have been made and future rate increases have been planned, or we target for CPI for rate increases. There are no new major capital projects in 25 or 26. The construction of the plant renewal project commenced in July of 22. At the end of August of 24, the project is progressing well. We were 27 months in, about 70% completed, about 69% of contingency allowances have been approved to be utilized, and the project is about 5 months behind schedule. The critical path items, though, are on schedule, and there have been some disruptions on operations from construction activities, but these have been mitigated appropriately with all parties. There are some commercially sensitive items of dispute which will not likely be addressed until after substantial completion and will likely have to go through a formal dispute resolution process, but the project should be substantially complete by March of 2026. After which time we have a 2-year process validation period to ensure everything works as it's intended. We have spent $253 million of the $325 million budget. The ICIP grant, we have received $121 million of the $163 million. All major process conversions are in progress or have been completed. A lot of the plant is operating in both a temporary state with old processes with the new and is not in the final configuration. Most of the treatment processes should be completed by Q3 of 25, and the entire project will be substantially complete again by March of 26. There is some risk that ozone system will not be operating before our seasonal taste and odor cyanobacteria blooms occur, but the contractor has done everything they can to mitigate these risks. And the project, once completed, will address the current risks, ensure the sustainability of the water treatment plant, provide resiliency to climate change, be more environmentally sustainable, operate more efficiently, and meet the growth demands in the region to the year 2050. There are quarterly time-lapse videos and drone videos on our website I would encourage council to view, and plant tours for city council and administration are always available, and I thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today. I'd be happy to entertain any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Before we take questions, I do want to take a moment to recognize the former Speaker of the Legislative Assembly, Randy Weeks, who is in the gallery with us today, and he was a prime architect and supporter of the program our Nigerian guests are attending. Welcome. Okay, so we will now take questions for Mr. Johnson. I see Councillor Fro. Please go ahead.
Thank you, and welcome. Appreciate your comments. I understand that one of the goals of your organization is to monitor, amongst other things, Buffalo Pound Lake, the Upper Coppell River, and certainly Lake Diefenbaker. And you spoke about, adapting to climate change and making sure that we're in a position to have reliable and safe water for our community. I'm wondering to what extent you or your colleagues have done an analysis on how the Lake Diefenbaker irrigation project and its plan to irrigate roughly 500,000 acres for the purpose largely of irrigation and forage, moving up the value-added agriculture value chain, as it relates to climate change mitigation for agriculture and economic growth. I'm wondering to what extent you've analyzed and looked at the future water security for Regina and how that project, if it reaches fruition, will affect the water that ends up into Buffalo Pound, and through Buffalo Pound, of course, the residents and commercial users in Regina. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, through Madam Chair, to Councillor. We've been dealing with this for a couple decades, since there's been many discussions and many hats I've worn in the past. I don't focus on the economic feasibility on that and its secondary benefits because that's nothing I look at. I look at purely from the water treatment plant's perspective and what it would do for the plant. Based on what we understand is being proposed for, well, phase 1 will have no impact on us, so we're talking about, I think, phase 2, phase 3, which could be decades away or could be, shorter depending on how things mature. The reality is an irrigation project will not have a significant benefit for the plant itself. Reason being, water would only be going through the channel during maybe 5 months of the year. A lot of it's being used for irrigation, so not a lot of the water will be actually returned into Buffalo Pound Lake. So we won't see, at least we don't believe we'll see much change. Now, the question's been come up many times, and if we were to get if we actually built Buffalo Pound, the water treatment plant actually at Lake Diefenbaker, and we were using Lake Diefenbaker as a source of water, we could save a few $100,000 in chemical costs. But my chemical budget is $4 million, so it has minimal impact on cost savings. So having better, cleaner water from Diefenbaker isn't going to save us a lot of money. So from a financial benefit cost analysis, we don't really see a lot of benefit. Now, there could be some other benefits, though, with the channel that from the water that comes from Diefenbaker into Buffalo Pound Lake goes through about 130 kilometer long meandering channel that is being choked off through weed growth. The Water Security Agency has been doing programs in the past where they would look at bottlenecks and they'd clean them up stuff to increase the flow rate through those areas. So they're reviewing, last time we talked to them, they're still looking at reviewing what they're going to be doing for the future. Because irrigation could improve flow for those periods of time there's water going through it. But again, a lot of that water is being used for irrigation. It's not going to actually go into the lake. And where they were talking about having the channel discharge into our lake is 30 kilometers away from the plant. So even the water that comes from Diefenbaker, it's going to take, could be up to, 3 years before we'd actually see the benefit of that because it takes a long time for that water in the lake to change over. So really, we don't see a lot for the operations of the plant, but there could be lots of social economic value for communities that we don't take into account.
Yeah, and I guess maybe to rephrase my question, and the last one is, when you look at the long-term water security of Regina, right, to what extent have you studied that project and how it might negatively impact our ability for a safe, secure, long-term supply of water, knowing that Lake Diefenbaker gets glacier melt and climate change is affecting that? So to what extent have you looked at sort of a medium and long-term scenario that looks at our water security? And if so, what is in place to mitigate any concerns that might arise from the usage, the agriculture usage of our prime water supply? Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Councillor. So, Water Security Agency does a 25-year master plan where they look at, water inputs, water outputs, and we use them as our immediate guideline of where we're at. And in the near future and into the medium term, there's no concerns. They're telling us they're not worried long term. We have limited ability to really look at, because we don't control the water management in Saskatchewan, to know where the water, how much water is coming. But of the water that goes into Lake Diefenbaker, only 3% of that comes goes through the dam structure into Buffalo Pound Lake and the lower Capel system. 97% of the water goes north. And the evaporation losses, I believe, are greater than what the irrigation rates would be. So the Water Security Agency is comfortable telling us that they're not concerned. We have to rely on them because they are the ones that control water. But if it comes into, say, a prolonged drought situation, we are a priority user because we're municipal water. So we would have water where industrial customers would be cut off. So, the potash mines would lose water if it meant the cities being in jeopardy. But because we use so little of the water that comes through there, even with the reduced rainfall and glacial amount coming in through the system, over the next 25 years, we don't have concerns. But I can't speak beyond what Water Security Agency gives us because we don't really have the ability to do research beyond that. We focus a lot more on the water quality, but we're being told the quantity is fine.
Thank you, Councillor Fro. I don't see other questions. I do have some, but I'm just waiting to see. Okay, Councillor Rasevich. Please go ahead.
Through the chair, this might relate to a question you might have, Councillor Shannon. I guess water usage is dropping, or just recently it's been dropping, so, but costs are going up. So I guess kind of sort of the question would be is, if we all started using much less water, citizens in Regina would kind of assume that they would pay less. But I understand you have infrastructure, but maybe we don't need to expand as much infrastructure potentially if we're starting to use less water. And especially if we had programs where people even started using less and less. So.
Thank you, Madam Chair, through you to Councillor. So yes, when it comes to water usage, we have seen a trend over the last several years where the amount of water being purchased by cities is lower. 2024 was, I think most people would argue, was a very hot, dry year. And, based on timing of the rains that we did get, people weren't using as much. But there's all the other factors as well where the city may have been, or the city has repaired a lot of the water main breaks, so there's not a lot of leakage. So it's a more tighter system, so there's not as much water loss. So we do have fixed costs, we have variable costs. So when water sales are down, the fixed costs remain the same whether we sell 1,000 megaliters of water, we sell 35,000 megaliters. The fixed cost doesn't change. The variable does, and it's about a 60-40 split. So last year we were about 900,000 short on water sales, but we also saved about $380,000 in chemical and utilities because those are generally where variable costs are. So there is some savings. So it's not one for one, but unfortunately we still have to make up for the base plus the unit incremental cost. So we do have to increase rates a bit. When it comes to the infrastructure, I can only speak for water treatment plant. I can't speak for the city's distribution system, but the way the water treatment plant was built, it's co-owned by 2 cities. When we did the upgrade project, it was to deal with a whole bunch of aging infrastructure issues, changing technology so that we were more robust because we were having treatment problems in the past. And we were looking for growth to the year 2050. Now, you may see consumption per person go down, but you also see growth in number of people. So the mix is complex as you have more people coming in using water, people are conserving water, or the cities has less leaks or less unaccountable or unbillable water. So those all factor in. And when you put it into the model when we're trying to figure out what a rate should be, that's kind of where we come up. So yeah, so the rates did go up, but the primary rate increase for this year was specifically because we have a plant renewal project near completion. A lot of our processes are coming online and they're using chemicals we never used before, but those chemicals have costs. So that's a lot of those pieces. But we did see about 3% increase because we had to reduce our we reduced the forecast water sales because again, we had to make sure we balanced out. So that's what happened. But when it comes to reducing infrastructure, you still have the system that works. What we can say is with the plant is once we're done this project, we should be good for the next 25 years before we go to the next reiteration.
Okay, so through the chair, I guess off that would be is okay. So you have expenses of infrastructure, but once that infrastructure is paid for and we have a consistent, I guess, less water usage, we would assume that maybe costs could come down.
Thank you, Madam Chair, to the Councillor. Okay, if you're talking long term, it could come to the point where you could see reduced costs overall, but I think you're going to find with growth that it's probably not, it's not going to be one-for-one relationship either. I think you'll find that it's not going to change a lot. What you may see is we've had 0 increases in years where we didn't need an increase because we had enough. So I think you'll find that maybe the level of increases could be below CPI, but I don't think you'll ever see it go much lower than 0 if we don't need the money. But something when we were created, the cities didn't want to see our rates going up and down. So we maintain a 0 if things are better. They just won't go up. But we are not going to do negative rate increases because again, we still have to pay for the majority of the cost to make sure things are going. But I think if you look long-term, the city's growth will probably outpace any of that reduced consumption. So I think the global consumption will maintain over time. It's just, water sales forecasting is difficult because it depends on the rain, depends on consumers and what they want to use for water. It does, rates do have an impact on that as well. But, we do our best to try to figure out how much water we think we'll use. In the past, the cities used to give us a number and we would just run to that number, and we used to be short or we'd have surplus. And we were structured differently because at the time the city had a lot of control over how things were done. So we'd either be short money and cities would have to give us money, or we would have extra money and we'd give a dividend back. When we were created as a corporation, the intent was we have to maintain our own reserves. So we have to have our own buffer. So this year, we're going to be short $370,000 or so, but we have to be able to maintain that ourselves. We don't go back to cities and ask for, well, okay, we're short this year, next year we have a surplus of $200,000, we don't give that back either. So we have to maintain that ourselves. But I think long-term, I don't think you're going to see a significant change, other than you will see rates maybe stabilize to CPI or lower, but I don't think you're going to see anything much more than that. Because of the question, though, we'll do a little more analysis on it and just take a look, and maybe we'll look at it, say, a 25, 30-year projection.
And I guess through the chair, I'll add on to that. I mean, you're saying that, yeah, we'll have an increase of population, more usage, but you'll have more people paying. So you are getting more revenue, right? So I guess, I don't have all the numbers in front of me, but there's got to be some sort of balance somewhere in terms of you got more usage, you got people using less water, you got more, if we're growing in population, we have more revenue. So that's my point, is why does your expenses actually have to go up? Because you're collecting more revenue from more population, but people are using less.
When you put it in a form, or when you put it in a model, I think it's pretty clear, but I understand just, without having all the math in front of us, I could see where, it could be, I could see where you could come to that conclusion. But, I'll take a look, like, we don't normally do our projections, we do 10-year budgeting cycles. We don't do 25, 30 years, so we look real long-term. But, we'll do an exercise just to take a look to see what that looks like.
Okay.
Thank you, Councillor Rasevich. Councillor Flores, please go ahead.
Thank you. Through the chair, just moving to a different part of the report, it mentions that the solar project can provide up to 10% of the plant's needs. Can you please elaborate on the return on that investment for that solar project?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, the councillor. I think it was 15-year payback, so it was very reasonable. The panels themselves should last about 25 to 30 years, so we again, long-term, we think this is a really good investment.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Flores. I do have a question, maybe just one, building on some of the line of questions from Councillor Rasevich. I was also concerned to read a media story noting that the water rates would be going up. I know about the plant renewal, but in relation to the portion in relation to the decrease in water sales, I know that folks are trying very hard to conserve water to try to keep their rates affordable. And so, and in my mind, we should be rewarding water conservation when we've been consistently experiencing drought-like conditions, our water travels from so far away. So I know you said that you already committed to looking at the rates, running the formula, we'll just say that again. But how, do you have any other, if this trend continues in terms of water conservation and folks trying to save money that way, is there other ways to offset those costs aside from raising the water rates? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Thank you.
I was going to say through the chair, through myself.
Yeah. Thank you, Madam Chair. So you'll always save money by using less water. I mean, for every liter of water you don't use, you're not paying that fee. The incremental increase in rates is based on more so the fixed costs. So 60% I still have to recover. So if everyone dropped all their water usage in half, I still need to recover that 60%, but you're saving on the 40% variable because then I don't need as much chemical, don't need as much power to operate the equipment. So you do have savings, it's just not dollar for dollar. So the rates will go up, but they won't go up as much as they would if everything was like a line department where every dollar is a dollar and there's no variable, it's all fixed costs, you know, if it's all, say, all labor. So you do save money by not using it, but you're not saving it as a dollar for dollar, you're saving 40% of that overall.
Okay. So aside from looking at the formula, or not looking at the formula, but doing another calculation, having a closer look, is there anything else to be done in relation to this concern at this time?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Based on what we did for the correction, I think we'll be fine. For the, we're 3.5% short 3 years ago, 3% short 2 years ago, and 6% last year, being 2024. By adjusting it by 3% or so, we should be okay going forward because, you know, based on what we look at in the past, and we normally, the last 2 years are a good indicator of how much water we'll use in the future. That's our best estimate of looking at water usage. So if we correct for the last average of the last 2 years or so, we're close. So I think you won't see another correction again for some time. And we could see, if we get into, you know, a prolonged dry period of time, we could actually see us increase the water sales forecast, which would then keep us closer to a zero increase.
Okay. Okay, I think I'm good for now. I may follow up prior to budget time with some, just to connect further on that to better understand. Okay, I do see, and now we have more questions. So now we have Councillor Bisso. Please go ahead.
Hi, thank you. Through the chair, you mentioned on the capitalized cost in the contracts, I picked up on a note where you said there might be dispute resolution happening with the contract. How much risk are we putting due to the dispute resolution? Are we looking at substantial dollars? Are we looking at time, materials? Like, what is the what's the whole process going on behind the dispute resolution?
Thank you, through Madam Chair. I can't get into details just because it could be, well, it's more than likely going to dispute. So what it is, a lot of it is unsubstantiated delay claims. So they have delays that they're adding together. They're not concurrent. They're sequential. So those kinds of things. So when it comes to the dollar value, right now, I think we're around $27 million is kind of the number that they're kicking out. We think the number is closer to about 5, but until we go through, you know, again, I can't get a lot of the detail, but generally speaking, what we found is when you go through dispute resolution with other cities that have had to be gone through fights to contractors, you generally come in a lot less than what their ask is. But if you look at their math, there's a lot of questions we have on it. So, you know, again, we got to protect the interests of the two cities, so this is one where it's got to go through dispute resolution unless the contractor has a change of heart.
Okay. Are you into the contingency for the project then, or were we on track?
We're into the contingency, and right now, based on everything that we've approved and agree with, we're actually very healthy and things are fine. We still have contingency remaining. And we do have plans of how we will address some of the risk, but you know, we're not done the project yet. The contractor is trying to repackage some of these claims so that we can take a look at it, see if there's something more reasonable in there, but you know, we've been trying since May of last year and we haven't seen anything that seemed to be encouraging. So we're managing the project to ensure that we're not paying for things that are contrary to the contract or things that we don't believe should be paid, and we're just going to manage it appropriately.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bisso. Councillor Vasevich, please go ahead.
My last one, through the chair. So if everybody in Regina would use 10% less water, how would that affect you?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thinking out loud, so if Regina cut its consumption by 10%, I brought my... I know the individuals, I guess on that 40% it would drop, but would that, you know, create more deficit for you somehow? It would definitely have a small impact. So we'll just make easy numbers up. Say it's $1 million, so you dropped it by 100,000 in that. So I would have to recover about 60% of that, but 40% would be a global savings. to those people, but at the time, you save everything, the rates will have to go up the following year. It's kind of like how Sask Power, I'm assuming Sask Energy, the same thing is, you still have to bring in so many dollars every year, and if people are using less, your rates have to go up, generally speaking, not dollar for dollar, proportionally, because you still have to bring in the same number of levels, so, if someone did something, 10% we can absorb. It's when you do something drastic, like everyone decided not to water lawns at all, that would be noticeable. But last year we were 6% short in sales, and that impact was about 900,000 short on revenue on us, but, we did save $380,000 on that. So, the net was only 500.
Obviously, I'm thinking, hey, because people could save, you know what, if we had a program, people save 10%, that's a lot.
Yep.
But then they would be paying more.
Slightly more.
Yeah, so it's counter, it doesn't somehow make sense. Right?
I think you'll find it goes to there's an equilibrium that will be reached, and then at that point, then things will just be smooth.
Okay, thank you.
Last year was an unusual year, that's all.
Thank you, Councillor Rasovich. Okay, Councillor Sickles, please go ahead.
Thank you. Through the chair, thank you for your presentation. I'll try not to beat up on you on price anymore. But guess what? I'm going to talk to you about numbers again. But this time I thought I might ask you, I'm assuming we're within a number of associations of water providers in Canada and maybe even North America. And I don't know how unique Regina is in the way in which we're structured and how we get our water. Do we have comparables with other cities, and are they at 60% as well?
Thank you, through Madam Chair. Yes, we were involved in the Canadian Water Works Association, American Water Works Association, as well as the National Water Wastewater Benchmarking Group. We do water rate comparisons, and we're mid-pack. Like, we're not high, we're not low, we're in the middle of the group. But we've never asked a question about fixed versus variable costs. Good question, something we can definitely take back and look, and we can get an answer, because that is something we haven't looked at outside our own organization. But we are different because we're really a water wholesaler, so we basically produce water. It costs us 76 cents a cubic meter, you sell it for $2.40. Where other cities, generally speaking, the water treatment plants are within their own communities, and one city owns one plant, so they also have their distribution system combined. So comparing us, there's only, there's a handful of regional water systems. There's one in Windsor that does Windsor in that area there. There's Pimba in Manitoba, which does a lot of smaller communities. I think they got 14 owners. So you have those in the states. So it's more common in states where you'll have one plant services a bunch of communities. But the U.S. data is hard to compare to because they have different regulations than what we do in Canada. But we can go back and talk to the other regional systems to get an idea as a water wholesaler, where we fit in for variable and fixed costs. But it's hard to pull that out because most cities have one plant or multiple plants, and they're all tied in with their distribution system, so they can't really pull the numbers out easily. But we can inquire.
Okay. Councillor Rasovich.
One more.
Please go
I'm
ahead.
assuming, is the Buffalo Pound, are you involved in building the infrastructure for fluoride?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, Councillor, yes, we're, as a service provider, we've been asked by the City of Regina to do the system. So the system's been designed. We will be tender ready probably summer, with the intent of procuring and installing in January-ish of 2026
Okay, so you're just tendering right now?
Yeah, the design's basically done. Because we have an active contractor on site, we don't want two contractors tripping over each other, so we're purposely waiting for the one contractor to be nearly done as we tender, so that one goes out as one comes in.
Yes. So nothing's being built yet?
Nothing's been built yet, but it's
Okay.
been designed and ready for procurement shortly.
All right, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Lots of interest in your corporation, which is good. So I don't see other questions. So I will thank you for your time and ask you to return to the gallery. Okay. We will now consider item EX 25-1, Buffalo Pound Water Treatment Corporation Semi-Annual Report. I'm going to ask City Manager Nikki Anderson to introduce the report.
Thank you. Through the chair. The Buffalo Pound Water Treatment Corporation is jointly owned by the City of Regina, 74%, and Moose Jaw, 26%, and provides both cities, as you heard, with a reliable supply of safe, high-quality drinking water. They're managed by an independent board of directors to carry out their mandate. So the purpose of this report is to provide City Council with the semi-annual report describing the water treatment plant's activities in 2024 as outlined in section 7.1 of the unanimous members agreement. While the report is provided as information, and as you already heard from Mr. Ryan Johnson, there's no council decision to be made on this report. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Anderson. Are there any questions from members to administration on, right. Thank you. Before I ask if you have questions, I do need someone to move the report. Okay, Councillor Sickleys, I'll give that to you. Do you have questions for administration on this report? No? Okay, and if anyone else does, please indicate by pressing your speaking button. I'm not seeing any. Looks like administration is off the hook. So still don't see any, so I will ask the clerk to start the vote. I'm going to ask for Councillor Turnbull's vote verbally.
Accept? Yes?
Okay, in favor,
I do.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Deputy Mayor, the motion passes unanimously 10-0, with all members present voting in favor. And for the record, Councillor Mancinelli is absent from today's meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. We will now consider item EX 25-4, Office to Residential Incentive Pilot. One second. We will not be considering that yet. We are instead going to consider, I'm just trying to keep everyone on their toes. How about we do EX 25-2 Regina Housing Needs Assessment? But I'm still going to ask Ms. Anderson to introduce the report. Please go ahead.
Thank you, through the chair. On December 13th, 2023, the City of Regina entered into an agreement with the Government of Canada through the Housing Accelerator Fund program. The fund grants approximately $25.3 million to the city, and it's to encourage construction of new housing to support a growing population. So for this report, developing the municipal housing needs assessment and submitting it to the federal government is a requirement of the funding. This report contains the findings of the housing needs assessment, and we're asking council to approve the assessment and to approve administration sharing the information with the federal government. As a next step, administration is also asking in the report that council instruct administration to develop a comprehensive housing strategy to respond to the housing needs assessment. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Anderson. Can I have someone, oh, I already have someone, to move the report? Is that going to be you, Councillor Fro? Okay, please go ahead.
Well, through the chair, thank you. The report was excellent. My question relates to the demographics of our community and how it affects the housing needs. So, roughly according to Statistics Canada, 18% of our population are new Canadians, and we've seen well over a 200% increase in new Canadians in the last 10 years. And the birth rate of new Canadians is roughly double that of native-born folks. And so virtually all the population growth in Regina is coming from immigration, notwithstanding changes to federal policy. That's quite likely to continue. And as you say, residential construction hasn't kept pace with population growth. So when I look at the Watson report and the supplementary housing needs assessment, I see very little analysis on the impact of new Canadians, their birth rate, and their corresponding housing needs, but also how that impacts the future growth of our city. There is a part, certainly, as it talks about the core housing needs that sort of speak to Indigenous folks having a growth rate of 22%, new migrants 15%, right, of core housing. So I guess my question is twofold. I guess first, do we know how the population growth of new Canadians will impact our housing needs? And secondly, housing, of course, is only part of living in a community. And so we taken into account, as part of your analysis, either within that report or otherwise, how transit, leisure, recreation, I guess like critically, how we align the interests and skills of those moving to our communities with jobs and the broader impact on the economy. So knowing that Watson identified that, they're not demographers, but there didn't appear to be, in my reading, sort of a projection or any models on new Canadians, their housing needs or their population growth. So my question then is, are we looking into that? And are we looking at, beyond the growth of new Canadians, how we support those folks as they move into our community? Through the chair, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fro. Who should I give that one to? Sorry? One sec.
Thank you. Through the chair, we actually have Watson appearing virtually. So I might start out by asking Eric if he would like to respond to that, and then if administration wants to add anything to it, they're more than welcome to.
Please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Hopefully you can hear me. I'm Eric Carvinen, manager with Watson and Associates, and through you, the chair, wanting to respond to the question that was asked about immigration and implications on the community and population and housing growth. So, wanting to take a step back to help answer that question. So, we are here today to discuss the housing needs study, which Watson authored. But before that, our firm also prepared a broader growth study for the city, which looked at population growth and the drivers of growth. And that work was grounded to a very extensive analysis and cohort modeling and demographic analysis, which identified population growth being driven largely by net migration, much of that being international. And so there is a lot of cohort and demographic analysis that has gone into the broader growth study, and the housing needs work has leveraged that output in this deliverable. I think it's an important discussion, definitely. I think that there are obviously implications on housing needs when looking at any demographic data, and population shifts and growth by age structure is very important. Understanding net migration is an important part of that discussion. New arrivals to Canada and those that are arriving in Regina, they tend to be younger, more working age population. So their housing needs, are perhaps somewhat different than the base population in Regina. Many of them are looking for, smaller housing units, but then there's also a need for larger units driven by families. There's also a growing trend towards more multi-generational living, which which culturally is more appropriate for many of the new arrivals. And then that obviously puts more demands for larger housing units to accommodate larger multi-generational families. And so, yes, we have factored in those considerations in our study, but keeping in mind that ultimately, they're just one component of what's going to be driving population growth and population shifts in your community over the coming decades.
Councillor Fro, did you have, I'm just going to turn your mic back on.
Yeah, well, no, through the chair, thank you for that. And again, it was an excellent report. And of course, you're dealing with a rookie councillor, so thank you for entertaining my questions. I guess then maybe through the chair to administration, knowing that it was sort of a housing needs assessment. The second part of the question was it within the purview of the report, or if not, what other work is doing to make sure that as our community changes and the housing needs change, with a focus on the cohort of new Canadians, that we're prepared to welcome and serve them so that, one, we retain them, but also we put them in the best possible chance to sort of realize their potential. Thank you. Last question.
And who should we direct, who would like that question? Sorry, one sec. Is that Michael wants that one? Okay, one sec. Please go ahead, Mr. Sliva.
Yeah, sure. Through the chair, we as an administration recognize the need for kind of the related elements outside of just housing to support new Canadians. We have several reports and plans that speak to that, whether that's the official community plan, the recreation master plan, transportation master plan. Housing is one component of future population growth. It's certainly been the biggest news item in the last few years, but the city is aware of the related needs and has related projects to speak to those specific items.
Councillor Fro, did you have something further? Okay. All right, thank you. Next, I see Councillor Turnbull. Please go ahead.
It's okay. I think it's actually for 25-3, my next question. Sorry, I'm a little bit all over the place without my computer.
So you're fine?
Yeah, I think it's actually 25.3 for my question, and we're on 25.
Yes, okay.
Okay.
Okay, no worries. Councillor Burton, please go ahead.
Okay, as I was reading the report there last night from Watson Associates, I kept seeing this compact urban form coming up, and I was just wondering if you could explain why that seems to keep popping up in these designs and in addressing housing needs. That I look around me and I see lots of land. I realize we're constrained by the U.S. border to the south, the Canadian Shield to the north, the Great Lakes to the east, and the mountains to the west. But I'm not seeing the problem here, and we aren't megalopolis city. We're Regina, 250,000, and we don't have the critical mass for mass transit of a subway, a monorail, whatever you want to say there. And I just wanted somebody to talk to seems like a lot of talk about compact urban form.
Okay, where should we send that question? You win again, Mr. Sliva. Please go ahead.
Sure. Through the chair, a lot of it does come down to dollars and cents. The land might be present, but it's very expensive to service, and it's not just, city fees. We have servicing agreement fees for new land. You have to put in pipes, and you have to put in road, and all of these things add up. So when a developer is ultimately choosing to develop housing and build housing, there's a price point attached to that, and they're very cognizant of what people in Regina can afford. And when you put all of these elements together, there's just not a market for those 2,000 square foot homes, row after row after row that we might have seen in generations past. The cost is too elevated compared to what people's incomes are. So we're not pushing kind of compact urban form directly, as much as recognizing that the market will ultimately dictate the form of development we see, and based on the incomes and the associated costs, that's what we're anticipating and ultimately have seen the last 15 years a market shift, and that's largely due to to all of those inputs from, I say, the undergrounds, but also the cost of construction, inflation, labor pricing. So that compact urban form is kind of a natural result of economics.
I'm going to challenge that because, yeah, there's a few more feet of pipe, and then there's one pipe going to a house. And I don't think people are, looking for 2,000 square foot homes and mansions or various things like that, but they're looking to live in a livable community. And as mentioned previously, we have immigrant families, and talking to school board people, they're talking about 2.5 families per home in some areas and stuff like that. You got families with 2 parents, 3 kids, 5 cars, and I don't call it compact urban form. What I'm seeing there is compact urban squalor. I am seriously getting people calling me about feuds for parking on the street. I have no place to plug my car in. I can't, and technically we're not supposed to run our block heater cord across the sidewalk, but in these cases, these people can't even get close to their house to try and even plug it in across the sidewalk here for that. When it snows in Regina, it stays until March. Yeah, once in a while we get a December melt, but we aren't a coastal, a Mediterranean, a southern Ontario climate where if you go and look at some webcams, you'll see, yeah, some smattering of snow, but then it goes away. And people are struggling with trying to get someplace to put their car. We've gone ultra compact, and I challenge the cost for the pipe there, but everything we save on a capital basis, we end up spending on expense. It's tough to clear the roads. There's a gazillion cars all over the place. It's wall to wall with cars, and there's not even a place to put it. And then people are screaming because there's this big ridge around their car, and I can't get my car out in the city, put my snow in the way. So just wanted you to expand on a few of those things there, because it's not making it not livable. I am in agreement with various things to try and, let's build some apartment buildings downtown, making sure there's enough parking for them and stuff. But I'm getting a lot of complaints from people living in some of these compact areas.
Out and pass it along to Ms. Dawson with administration. We don't direct that everything has to be compact urban form. If a developer chose to build a cul-de-sac of 1,200 or 1,400 square foot detached homes, that's something that is planned for and anticipated as part of new neighborhoods. The developers aren't building houses with the intention of them sitting empty. They're looking to build houses that will sell, and the houses that you've seen built in the last 2 to 10 years are being built to ultimately to what the consumer preference and the consumer budget can make work. But I might pass the rest of the density questions on to Ms. Dawson.
Sorry, just one sec. Please go ahead, Ms. Dawson.
Thank you, through the chair. And I appreciate the questions, and certainly really good conversation about city building and community design and those types of things. And we would be happy to have a conversation about that and how our policies influence what's built and where. The topic of the conversation is really about the housing needs assessment and the programs that the city runs in terms of housing programs and helping people into homes through incentives and other things. And the housing needs assessment really is identifying what needs are within our community. And then from that, the work that the housing team is going to do is to develop programs that'll help advance housing in respect to what the needs are. And so really the design of communities and the issues that you brought up, Councillor Burton, through the chair, are really important discussions and certainly help influence the way that we design communities. But the housing needs assessment is more so aligned with the needs within our communities and how do we get people into homes.
Okay, thank you. So through the chair, and with respect, I will challenge a bunch of things here, that it's the developers, they got to put something out there that they'll make money, and then we have to deal with the constant increases of taxes, and there's the effort, because now we have to plow miles of alley because they took away a driveway in the front where you'd have a second parking pad for the person, and now we have to plow that alley, and people are complaining about the snow up against their garage door. They don't even have a pad to shovel the snow away. There's no place to put snow storage, front or back. And so I'm going to be asking, you know, that we need to think about the long term. It seems like the emphasis here is on just getting this built right now and get the house up and we got someplace people live. And then people are screaming at their councillor over all the problems on an ongoing basis. And I just feel that, I'm going to ask the question, has some of these ongoing aspects been missed in some of this design? I don't see some things here, talks about getting stuff in here compact and all the good stuff like that, but it doesn't talk about the fact that we live in Regina, where the snow stays until March, where you can't walk on the sidewalks. All the snow's been plowed up there because it's so small that people are, you know, stumbling along, and then we suggest, well, why don't you take the bus? Well, I got to take the bus and I got to drag my kid with me, and I can't even get across the sidewalk because it's that jammed up with snow there for that. So my question is, have some of these long-term parking and snow issues been considered as we're looking at properties? Because you can't just look at the house. You got to look at the living, people living there and managing those environments.
So I see Ms. Bryden. Okay, just one sec, please. Please go ahead.
Again, thank you through the chair. Thank you for those questions. And I guess I would say, as we have built communities, we have also taken away some lessons learned. We're working very collaboratively when we're seeing new developments come in with our internal service providers for snow removal, garbage collection, those types of things, so that we can fire clearly, so that we can take those things into consideration as communities build out. But I would say again, and just reiterate what Ms. Dawson indicated, is that this is a great conversation. It is a little bit separate from what the housing needs assessment report is indicating, and happy to have these conversations as new communities and developments come forward.
Okay. I guess, and I'll through the chair, I'll move on to just describing that as we keep it super compact. The phrase said to me, and I like the phrase, when you get down to St. Elizabeth or the Wascana Plains School there, if you go there when school is coming in or out, it's a sight to behold. The mayhem, the people trying to jockey for position to get their kid to try and get in and out. And we've got apartments built right up close. There's a new development going in right beside that I received calls about. And again, you know, off the housing aspect here, as we try to do that again, we aren't Mediterranean, we aren't coastal, we aren't southern, we aren't in Calgary where they get Chinooks that melt all the snow away right to the grass here and stuff. It's staying here till March. And again, so people are then complaining about near the Chuka Boulevard, about getting down the side streets that they can't.
Councillor Burton, sorry, you only have 30 seconds, and
Okay.
so I don't know if you have something further.
You bet. Yeah, no, this is more on the commercial aspect here. So I'm seeing that commercial and schools, that again, it's more than just the house that people are moving in, that they're struggling with all the aspects of this compact urban form commercially, and going to school and, you know, trying to get to the park and you can't find his parking spot. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Burton. Next, Councillor Rasevich, please go ahead.
Through the chair, just to piggyback off Councillor Burton saying, it sounds like we are looking at, you know, in certain instances we're expanding roads and for parking, et cetera, because the city plan, we have a new development going up in Harbor Landing, and the streets are going to be, I think, I don't know, is it the 18 meters? What's from 15 meters to, is it 15 feet, or is it 18 meters? I don't, but it's an example of, you know, where I think people are complaining about parking and everything, so it sounds like we are sort of looking at those concerns, and that was an example last night with city planning that I noticed, so I'll let you kind of talk to that.
Okay, Ms. Bryden, please go ahead.
Thank you through the chair. Yes, again, as you know, communities build out, we do hear concerns from residents, and we know that councillors hear concerns from residents. And so we do review those design standards so that we can provide, you know,
things like wider streets. So the design standard for streets went from 15 meters to 18 meters, so it will accommodate parking on both sides of the streets, for example. There are some areas in Harbor Landing specifically where that isn't accommodated, and Harbor Landing is a fairly compact community. Again, you know, happy to be having those conversations with our internal partners that provide snow removal, waste collection, all those things that, you know, frustrate people during certain times of the year. And so that we can adjust those design standards in collaboration, and then certainly working with the developers as we make those adjustments.
Councillor Rasevich, I don't know if your mic's still on. Do you have anything further?
It looks like you guys are, I mean, you know, planning is looking at that, so, and you're taking that into consideration. So I think, I guess to what Councillor Burton's saying, you know, it sounds like you are doing that in certain instances, or is the 15-meter, especially when you have a lot of density, it would make sense to have 18-meter roads at minimum, especially when you're compacting a lot of houses or, you know, multi-family units together and have that space on the roads. So anyways, I just wanted to let you know that I think we are hopefully looking at those things, Councillor Burton.
Thank you, Councillor Rasevich. Okay, now, so did you want to speak again, or we just press the mics at the same time?
Oh.
Okay, 1 sec, okay. You don't, I'll touch it.
Okay.
Okay, good, now we're good. Now, next I have Councillor Bizo. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Through the chair, this program is really based upon a lot of federal government funding. The federal government will change this year at one point, and this program may disappear. What does that do for the entire project that the city's put together? And will the city expect 100% fund this, or will this be somewhat clawed back?
Okay, wondering who to send that question to. Mr. Hirtis? I don't know how to say folks' last names, so please feel free to correct me.
Hirtis, thank you very
Hirtis,
much.
thank you.
Perhaps I can get some clarification, Councillor. Is this dealing with the report for the incentives going forward, or is this still related to the housing needs assessment?
Well, the Housing Accelerator Fund, like, there's a lot of implications to the Housing Accelerator Fund. The report actually states, you know, some dollars are from the city, some dollars are from the federal government. What happens if that federal government money disappears?
I might ask Mr. Sleva to take this one, as he was more involved with funding for this portion.
Go ahead. Thank you.
Sure. Through the chair, so the housing needs assessment itself has been fully funded. You know, the work with Watson was paid in joint between the city and the government of Saskatchewan, so that, you know, those bills have been paid and that's over. In terms of the upcoming housing strategy, you know, we would still be moving forward even under a change of federal government. Our existing housing strategy is from 2013 and spoke very acutely to the problems of 12 years ago now. So even in the change of a federal government, we would still anticipate bringing forward a housing strategy. How it may look could be impacted, but we know that we need to have that conversation about housing, and we know that we need to update our existing policies. So regardless of what was happening with the Housing Accelerator Fund, this had been a project that we had identified years ago as work that needed to be updated to reflect the current housing market. So I might ask you know, Mr. Nair to speak to that relationship with the federal government in terms of future payment related to HAF, but specifically to the housing needs assessment and the housing strategy, we are anticipating to go forward regardless of senior political leadership change.
Mr. Nair, please go ahead.
Yes, through the chair. In talking with CMHC, the assumptions right now is going forward that the program will continue until they hear otherwise. Specifically related to any of the work that we're doing with regards to the housing strategy in itself, it's self-contained within the city. It's already as part of the budget, and so there won't be any direct effect on that. But if there is some substantial change, obviously we'd have to make some directional changes. but our instructions in discussions with CMHC has been to proceed as assuming business as usual.
Did you have anything further, Councillor Beeson?
Well, the question really is it's business as usual. I get it with the present federal government in place, and they haven't received any directions. But what does this look like from a taxpayer perspective if the federal government money disappears? Will it be burden on the taxpayer, Regina, to carry on with this project, or are we going to pare this thing down?
Through the chair, as it sits right now, again, the housing strategy is completely self-contained and is already paid for, so that won't have any direct effect on it. What that would have an effect on is some of the other incentive programs going forward. So we would have to make an adaptation. We've already received the first set of funding, which is over $8 million. We will be, in a short period of time, receiving the second payment of an additional $8 million. Assuming that there is something that doesn't change or decide to claw it back, which we're told is unlikely, we would have the ability to fund all of the programs that we are put forward to date, and any future funding just means we would have to shift in terms of how we look at developing any other programs or where we put the investments in. It would change to something that may have to go through a budget firm, or budget process, pardon me.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Buzo. Are you don't need, or if you're touching your, there we go. I turn on and off the mics. You just indicate if you wish to speak. That way we don't have to keep battling with the mics. Councillor Turnbull, please go ahead.
Thank you to the chair, and this kind of sort of builds off of what Councillor Buzo was saying, but a little bit differently. I was concerned about the continuation of the Canada Community Building Fund, but I was more looking at point number 4 with the timing and seeing if there's any way we could accelerate our timing so that we can make sure to take advantage of any federal funding that could be on the table that may potentially not be there in the future. So I was wanting to ask, is there any way to make sure this work is prioritized so we don't lose any funding, future funding opportunities for it?
Mr. Sleva, please go ahead. Thank you.
Sure. Through the chair, point number 4 being about instructing administration to prepare a new comprehensive housing strategy. So I guess for clarity, that is not a requirement of the federal government. So there's no funding from the federal or provincial governments contingent on completing that. The housing needs assessment that's before you today is a requirement of the Housing Accelerator Fund from the federal government, but administration felt that the housing needs assessment didn't tell the full story. It tells us kind of where we are and what are the problems, but that a housing strategy would look at how do we address those problems. So that doesn't bring the city new funding, but it does direct the city to address the problems that we have before you today.
Thank you, and to the chair. So it is sort of like a domino effect. We have to do things in a certain order of phasing. So while that may not require funding, maybe the next step would. So I was just wondering what would be a timeline that is maybe reasonable but accelerated to make sure we get the most out of funding, which could possibly change over with a new government.
Sure. Through the chair, that's a conversation we could have internally. We have mapped out kind of the next year of work as it relates to a new housing strategy. A key piece that we're looking to do is to be in the community and having those conversations. As we learned in 2024, it's not easy to convince people to talk to you, even if you're offering them a good time and an honorarium and a free donut. So we've kind of baked that into our 2025 schedule, that it's not just, writing down some strategies on a piece of paper and hoping that's enough. We really want to have those conversations with community and with home developers and nonprofit and really everybody that is involved with the housing sector to ensure that when the city does bring forward strategies, that there's broad alignment with what we think is effective. In terms of expediting that, that could be a conversation we have internally. I think it would be unrealistic to move it earlier than that, just because we know that there's significant work ahead of us.
To the chair, would it be fair to ask for maybe sort of a Gantt chart or project management chart of where we need to get funding from and what stages from these funds that could possibly go away, to see how we could be advantageous to getting them, whether it's maybe doing 2 courses of work at the same time, or in your project management of this, to see how we can really make sure we get the most out of this federal funding while it is here in case it goes.
Mr. Nair, please go ahead.
Yes, through the chair. We have started building out the work plan, and it is definitely possible to provide something. We're always looking for opportunities that we can be efficient with our time and make sure that we can not only cover all the bases, but be diligent in the work. So it's something that we are currently working on and developing, and that would be something that we would be happy to share.
Okay. To the chair, thank you so much for working on this and understanding the concerns and being and really anything we can do to make sure we get the most of this funding. We all appreciate, all the taxpayers appreciate, so thank you so much. Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you. Okay, one sec. Ms. Anderson, please go ahead.
Thank you, through the chair. And I think the only thing that I would add as administration is, in building out the plan, we're trying to build expediency, frankly, along with doing an excellent job, especially because there's so much engagement that's involved. And, when I listen to the conversation with council, I would say Councillor Burton is saying and criticizing that some of the current built form that is dense, in his opinion, is not built well and is not built in a livable way. And so what I would say is these steps will help administration and frankly help council solidify what it actually means if we increase density, because we do have to have, I will say, a selection of residential options based on the diversity of our residents. But doing this work will help us agree on what we need to do to ensure that future areas that have dense residential or denser than the larger lots are built in a way that we would all agree are livable. And so, we talked a little bit about lessons learned, but I also want to say that to me, this work is really important to help us articulate how we make sure that that happens moving forward.
Can I respond to that? Yeah, to the chair, I appreciate that. I do not mean to cut corners. I was more so talking about overlapping tasks and benchmarks to make the most of it. I appreciate the due diligence and the community engagement 100%, and all those things. I was just, one of the big risks is clearly is being able to afford this, and right now we have some resources which we may not have available in the future, and that is a risk we very much have to keep in mind.
Thank you, Councillor Turnbull. Okay, I do not see further questions, but I guess I don't remember who moved this report. Was it Councillor Crowe? Did you wish to close debate? Okay. I think we can call the vote then.
Deputy Mayor, the motion passes in a vote of 9-1. Those voting in favor were Councillors Bezo, Rashevich, Turnbull, Zakidniak, yourself, I'm sorry, Seaclus, Flores, Fro, Radens, and Mayor Bashinsky. Voting against was Councillor Burton.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Our break is scheduled for 10:30, so rather than moving on to the next report, we will go ahead and take our first break, and then that could mean that we come back by, now it's time for math, 10:42. That's what time we will be back. Thank you. Okay, if folks can find their seats, we're going to call the meeting back to order, please. Okay, we will now consider item EX 25-3, 2025 Housing Incentives Policy Pilots and Revisions. I'm going to ask the City Manager, Nikki Anderson, to please introduce the report.
Thank you, through the chair. The city provides capital grants and residential tax exemptions through the Housing Incentive Program, which we refer to as HIP, to support the development of new housing units that address current housing needs. Over the last 10 years, the HIP has undergone both comprehensive reviews and minor amendments based on the city's shifting housing needs, the type and location of housing developments that have used incentives, and input received for internal and external stakeholders. The following report outlines recommendations updated to the city's housing incentive policy for 2025 and 2 pilot incentives that the city committed to implementing under the Housing Accelerator Fund agreement with the federal government. The first pilot is the rental acquisition and repair pilot incentive. This will support nonprofit housing providers to extend the life of their current housing stock through repairs and to rehabilitate housing stock that is currently not in the market due to condition. A tenant protection framework is recommended to reduce the risk of the city supporting projects where tenants are evicted without support. And then the second pilot is a pre-development grants pilot incentive. This will support nonprofit housing providers citywide and private developers in city center, north central, and heritage neighborhoods to explore the feasibility of projects by providing fund support for pre-development work such as site and servicing studies, drawings, and other activities. To support these pilots, administration recommends changes to the core housing incentive policy. This includes suspending the current rental repair tax exemption for the duration of the rental acquisition and repair pilot incentive and changing the way the city incentivizes secondary suites under the program. Other updates include updating the scorecard used to award capital grants to new build projects, creating more flexibility in the application intake process, adding transition provisions to better support large phase projects and transfer of incentives to new owners of a project, updates to align the policy generally with corporate standards, and last, clarifications to a variety of administrative matters. The recommendations partly fulfill the city's commitment under the Housing Accelerator Fund agreement and respond to requests from program stakeholders and opportunities for continuous improvement identified by administration. If approved, these pilots and amendments will be in place for the 2025 construction season. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Anderson. Can I have someone move this report? Thank you, Councillor Rasevich. Did you have questions on the report as a mover? Nope. Okay. I don't see anyone's lights. If you do have questions, thank you. Please turn your lights on. Now we see some. Councillor Turnbull, please start us off.
Oh, okay. I don't have to touch anything. I'm just also trying to pull up the right thing. So my question is about, well, I would like to make an amendment to point number 7, but I'd like to just ask some questions first before we make the amendment. So the amendment was to, sorry, I'm just on the wrong item here. For the addition of the architects and the technologists to do the surveying work. I do believe we do need to make an amendment to clarify what professionals we are talking about. Those positions as listed are not protected by any sort of Practice Act in Saskatchewan, nor are they organizational names. So we would have to be careful with what we're calling, because anyone here could be an architect or a technologist. And I do believe that is very important because just moving, I understand the intent to make things more available and take advantage of more scopes of services. So, but we want to do things right because it's more expensive in the long run to do things incorrectly. So my questions are, have you consulted with APEGS, which is the Engineering Association, about moving the scope of these civic services? Have you talked to the Saskatchewan Association of Architects about the increase to their services, the Technology Professionals of Saskatchewan, and the change up of all these permitting requirements?
Sorry, okay. Mr. Mayor, please go ahead.
Yes, through the chair. Thank you, Councillor Turnbull, for asking the question. It gives me an opportunity to give a further kind of explanation to this, because I realize that it could be an area that could potentially be slightly misconstrued. So specifically in the work, and when we look at the work of a quantity surveyor, all they are performing for us is the task, or their part of the work would be verifying that a project is X% complete. And that really is within the scope of their work as the quantity surveyor. So there's nothing to do with land or legal surveying. It's just for our way of verification that a project is 85% is at lockup. And so one of the problems that we've had is that there are very few quantity surveyors in the province of Saskatchewan, and this work is actually naturally performed by both architects, technologists, engineers, and such. And so it's really dealing with that very narrow scope of work, so it doesn't affect any of the bylaws or considerations around APEGS or the Saskatchewan Association of Architects. It is just a specific task that is often performed for banks. They will have property appraisers do that work. There are a number of people within that scope. So it doesn't affect anything with the liability around certifying foundations, building accessibility, National Building Code. It doesn't touch anything that's a requirement of the permitting process. So it is, all that is still required, and that's not specifically for this. The function of this is just to say, at this point in time, we can verify that the project is at 83%. And often with large architectural firms, it'll often go to a technologist. So we really have had, because it's a very narrow scope of things and it doesn't affect any of the bylaws with the agencies, we've made sure we don't feel that it has any potential implications with that, with regards to APEGS, Saskatchewan Architects Association, and such. So
to the chair, generally when an architecture firm does send out a technologist, the architect still stamps and signs the report, the substantial completion report. So they are still taking liability with their insurance. So I think it is important that we amend number 7, or we either pull it out, and I'm going to ask what you would prefer, but I think either number 7, we have to amend it to specify what the professional things that are, so that we can recognize the education, experience, examination, ethics, insurance requirements, and liability. So we either have to say what this is, or we can make a new motion, which we could say to explore administration to look into increasing services for other scopes with these organizations, for civic surveying or residential with these organizations, and maybe residential, small commercial, because I think the idea is to have more professionals being able to do these work and to make things more affordable and easier. So we can pull it out with the intent to do that and talk to these organizations and what that would mean. Or we can amend this, and if we do amend this, I think we would have to also not just include technologists, but you're looking at like all these other organizations which have equal to educational requirements that we would have to add on to that line item.
I might pause this for a moment and call on the city solicitor just to hearing the concerns that were noted, I guess the question is, sorry, just give me one. So based on what Councillor Turnbull has raised, if you, in your perspective as a solicitor, if you see any liability concerns, so I'll just pass it on to you, Ms. Williams.
Thank you, through the chair. I think I'm a bit confused as to the direction that we're trying to go in with the question that Councillor Turnbull is asking, but from the conversation and the responses that Mr. Nair provided with respect to what that section is doing, to me, it doesn't sound like there's any additional liability attached with including these individuals in the report, because they're not actually doing any, it's just including additional individuals to do work that's already being done, and it's not impacting on any liability issues with respect to the work that they're doing. So I don't see any liability in terms of a legal perspective from that. I think it's okay, but I'm not exactly sure if there's something I'm missing from the question that Councillor Turnbull's asking, because I didn't see that in the report, or any liability issues arising from that paragraph being included in the recommendations. So.
Councillor Turnbull, I just thought we'd get a legal perspective.
Yeah.
Do you wish to?
Yeah, so the technologists do not have a Practice Act or Titles Act or any requirements in terms of outside of an organization. If they belong to Accreditations of Canada, that's different. And same with the architects, just laying the word out, architect. If they have to belong to an association with their things, so the associations themselves verify they govern their practice. The professional organizations govern the practices, which ensure the ethics, the insurance, the requirements, and the education, experience, and examination. So if we just say architects and technologists, we are not noting their actual practice or their organization. So I think we either have to amend it to say, is this going to be a technologist accreditation or an architect through the SSA, and what other are we going to let do these services? Or we can make a new motion.
Ms. Williams, go ahead.
Sorry, through the chair, I'm just wondering if it said an accredited architect and or an accredited architectural technologist, does that satisfy what your concerns are? My understanding, I guess, is just that these individuals are already doing this type of work. Like, they're already doing the work, and they're just expanding in this recommendation just to include them in the process of what they're saying. So
sure, these individuals aren't listed as these individuals, so they're listed as architects and technologists, are not protected terms. They're not through organizations. They're not covered by Practice Act. That's just a term. And technologists themselves have to belong to the accreditation to have any sort of So technologists do the work, but they do not do the work without supervision. Technologists do get a stamp from an architect or professional in order to move on. They may be doing it, but that's getting reviewed. They are not independently doing the work and getting it approved at the city. You do not get a permit without that stamp.
The city clerk would like to weigh in, so just one sec, please. Yeah.
So with respect to, thank you, Deputy Mayor. So my question would be to Councillor Turnbull, if you're satisfied with a revision to the wording in number 7 that would reference accredited architects and accredited technologists, would that suffice? If it does, then you can ask Councillor Rashevich, as the mover of this, to accept that as just a friendly amendment, and we don't need any other procedural step here.
We can make a friendly amendment. I think it would be accredited and belonging to professional organization.
We can...
And I would increase that, because from just architects and technologists, I would probably, I think you have to add the CSA, the Canadian Building Officials, and the interior designers as well, because they all have the same sort of skill levels as the technologists and benchmarks.
Okay, sorry to intervene.
or interject. So if you're saying accredited architects and accredited architectural technologists as well as
your Saskatchewan building officials, your CSA certified, your registered interior designers, as belonging to a professional organization for accreditation.
Okay, can, Mr. Hertz wishes to speak, so, I'm just, well, I'll let you to discuss, I suppose, and I will pass it over to Mr. Hertz.
Thank you, Councillor. Through the chair, just a point for yourself and the city clerk as you develop this potential amendment. There's part of the housing incentives policy requires that we report back to council on any amendments made by the city manager in the past year, and then council can either choose to reverse that amendment or affirm it and keep going. So from the amendment perspective, it might be good to have this as an addition to number 7 as you've identified, so we get that affirmation and then a revision on top. This may also be a circumstance where it'd be good to refer it back to us, because then we can get a good handle on what professional organizations are out there, what other roles we should be including, because just for a bit of background, we adopted the language around quantity surveyors in 2023, and that was an effort to actually do exactly what you're getting to, Councillor, and put some specificity around who is qualified to be making these statements, because we didn't have it before. The problem is the definition we adopted ended up being too narrow, and we were excluding some roles that were very commonly involved with that. So this is an effort to right-size it, and so maybe further investigation is warranted in this case.
Sorry, just, I actually have a suggestion here. Because this is coming to council next week, and because we're talking about very specific wording and just wanting to not substantially change the report, but make sure that the wording is appropriate, I wonder if perhaps rather than, I think we may, if we do this now, I think we'd have to take a break to get the wording right. So in lieu of that, perhaps you can discuss the specific wording and compile that in advance of city council next week so that we can have it ready to go. Does that? Sorry, I don't have your mic on, so just one sec. Please go ahead.
To the chair, I think that would be good for an amendment, but maybe the approach would be to take out number 7 as a separate motion to give you time to explore what professional organizations and their scopes of services, because there's a lot, like as you said. Would it make more sense to administration to pull out 7 as a separate motion for you to explore other professions to do different scopes of work?
So just, I'm going to pass it to the clerk because him and I just had a brief conversation about this, so he can weigh in.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I think from a procedural point of view, I would recommend that you just leave number 7 as is and make any necessary amendments at the meeting at council next week. And I think my sense is admin understands where you're coming from, and that can be incorporated as we try to work towards this amendment to bring forward. So again, with respect, Council, we can meet with administration to get some input on this to write a better amendment.
Okay, so to the chair, so the direction will be to talk about our language for next week for an amendment, not a new motion. I'm okay with that if everyone else is.
Okay, and so, and for the sake of clarity, just for folks, as executive committee just makes recommendations to city council, all that's happening is this is going to be finalized, just like everything we're discussing today will be finalized at council, so that gives you the time to come up with the finalized language that you're looking for. Did you have anything further, Councillor Turnbull?
I don't think I have any more time, thank you.
No, you do.
Oh, I did great. Oh, no.
Oh, you're fine?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, next I see Councillor Burton. Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Through the chair. You probably guessed where I'm going. Parking! Again, for this. So as we talk about the incentives to do in here, for example, page 40 of, which report here we got here, talks about points for, as you want to do a backyard suite. And, now you're adding a new house, basically, or I'm adding a suite in my basement. I'm adding another car for that. And so, there's things in here where it says, is there on-site car share or bicycle share for tenants? Enclosed or covered bicycle parking. So this is parking facilities, 5 points. And parking vehicular access is in the rear lane. It's just 1 point here. Again, I'm concerned about the urban squalor, and that let's keep jamming houses in. Yeah, technically you can put the house there, but it comes along with some baggage. And that baggage has 4 wheels. Some places might be easier if you're close to downtown or some stuff like that. You build an apartment building, but I'm just concerned about with this. I want people to address I couldn't find anything that was said, really talked about the fact that we are a car city. It's some face of facts. I like going for bicycle rides around the neighborhood and stuff. I ain't going to work on my bicycle, and I ain't going downtown and then trying to get to my kid's event using public transit. I'm taking the car and I'm getting there and I'm throwing a bag in the back or whatever I need to do. So the question is about just the lack of consideration to me for vehicular parking and some of these things, especially with secondary suites.
Thank you, Councillor Burton. Who am I passing this along to? Okay, Mr. Hertz, please go ahead.
Perfect. To the chair, thank you for the question, Councillor. So looking at the design and development criteria scorecard, we built that out looking at the policy items in documents like the official community plan, various other strategies like the energy and sustainability framework. So this policy really exists under all those things. So in this case, the design guidelines in those policies indicates that this is how we want the parking to look. This is something to be aiming for. Keeping in mind that the fundamental goal of this policy is to support affordable housing, we recognize that there is that tension between having your housing affordable and having those parking spaces. So while we do give extra points for those features, they're not mandatory. They're not penalized for, say, having parking out front or not having a bicycle share or something like that. If those other strategic documents were to change, we would, of course, update these guidelines to align. To start making changes at this level would potentially put the housing incentives policy at odds with those broader strategic documents. And so that fit is something that we're always concerned about to make sure that this document is supporting those larger strategic items.
Did you have anything further, Councillor?
No, I'm good. I'm good.
Okay, thank you. All right. I see Councillor Biseau. Please go ahead.
Hi, thank you. Just, I'm going to say 2 questions, 2 points, completely independent of each other. Point number 7, to go along with Councillor Turnbull's, what was the purpose of the inclusion of architects, technologists, and survey as part of your strategy? What was the purpose of the inclusion?
So in this case, again, for background, the quantity surveyor piece was added in 2023. So prior to that, we have this portion of the housing incentives policy that allows us to give a partial payment prior to completion, and it's based on the percentage the project is complete, right? So before that, we didn't have any guidelines around who is qualified to make that assessment. So based on some research, we identified, okay, quantity surveyor is the right role for this. So in 2023, we adopted that provision in the policy. However, in 2024, there arose a case where the verification had been done by an architectural firm, right? And based off of some changes in the team, like we had added Mr. Nair, who has quite extensive experience in that area, we realized that the definition we had adopted in 2023 was too narrow. And so that was the reason we had recommended to the city manager to adjust the definition to also include these other roles. And the reason it's before you now is because we're required by the policy to notify you of any changes the city manager has made over the year, and then council has the option to either reverse them or affirm them.
Okay. So with the spreading out of the roles, or saying more people inclusion for the rules for the confirmation of the 85% or significant completion of the project. I'm going to suggest open this up to look at the Condos Act of what's qualified person for that residential real estate asset. So under the qualified persons, you're also opening it up to engineers, technologists, technologists, to have it more opened up. And then you'd have some cohesion with some other acts that are out there right now. That was question number one. Question number one / comment. So, yeah, fully support the point number 7 to open it up to look at the Condo Act and say what a qualified person is and to spell it out what a qualified person is, just so there's no confusion. Because as I read it, as right now, I'm saying an architect is equivalent to a surveyor, which completely different crafts. So just call it a qualified person. Second point I'm going to say is more on the point number 1, where it says the approval of the rental acquisitions repair pilot incentive program. Could somebody explain more detail around this? Now, as I read it, and because of as presented, it's to offer a grant. If somebody goes in and wrecks the house, it's to offer a grant to do the repairs of it. So I'd like to hear kind of more details around, then I'll have some more questions around that.
Certainly. So that is part of it. So we have heard from the nonprofit housing providers that we're in contact with regularly that repairs and maintenance have been an increasing challenge. So they, many of them have the ability to deal with, run-of-the-mill maintenance, but as you pointed out, if someone wrecks the unit, that can be in the range of, $10,000, $20,000, $25,000 sometimes to repair, depending on the extent of the damage. And while many of them can maybe absorb one of those a year, when you start getting 2 or 3, it leads to this vicious cycle where, well, now you have 1 or 2 units out of commission, which reduces your revenues, which reduces your ability to do maintenance, which further impacts your ability to keep units online. So part of this incentive is to assist with that circumstance. Another part is to help with the long-term maintenance of buildings. So nonprofits typically are operating on the financial edge, and sometimes decisions have to be made as to what kinds of repairs you prioritize, and some things get left longer than they should in ideal circumstances. And so part of this is about extending the longevity of the assets they already have. And so this third component is there's buildings out there in the city that have degraded to such a state that they're really not usable or habitable even in some cases. And so we have this potential housing stock sitting out there that is expensive to repair, but it could be in really good locations, like say close to the downtown, the city center. And so this incentive pilot is meant to help bring some of those units back online. Of course, a lot of this is going to depend on where the nonprofit's priorities. Is it on repairing those units that have become damaged? Is it on extending the life of their buildings? Are they looking to expand? This is something that we'll track over the course of the pilot, the types of applications we're getting, where the money is going to.
Okay, great explanation. Thank you very much for that. Really comes to the questions now. At this point is this is only for nonprofit, but what happens to the rest of the landlords out there, or the rest of the people that own rental units, and they experience the same thing? So there's a lot of people out there that take in people that are on social assistance, that are in different programs. They're not a nonprofit, but I can tell you for firsthand, they operate like a nonprofit because there is no profit margin in it. So you're only saying this is only open to nonprofits, registered nonprofits, not the entire market out there.
Through the chair, yes, that is correct currently, and I can give you a bit of background on why we made that decision. It comes down to the types of tools that we have to enforce the requirements under the housing incentives policy. So right now, we're not like Saskatchewan Housing Corporation. We don't register interest on title, so our legal options for enforcing the requirements come down to the agreements that we sign with the housing providers, what we could enforce in court through those agreements. And in this case, it's a balance of risks. So with a private developer, particularly under the acquisition side of this program, right, we considered it and decided the risk was higher than we were willing to accept at this point of a developer coming in, buying up a property, saying, certainly we'll keep it affordable, and then effectively reneging on that agreement. That's a concern we had. just the cost benefit of doing so was not favorable to adhering to those agreements. So for the moment, at least, it's limited to nonprofits. Given the mission-based the mission-based purpose of those organizations, there's sort of an added layer of protection from that. It's something we will keep an eye on over the course of this pilot, and at the end of 2026, when we bring a report back to recommend whether this incentive should continue or whether it should be removed or exist in a different form, that might be one of the things we come back with, is potentially opening it up to the private sector or private homeowners as well.
Okay, it's still wondering on that affordability aspect. When you're talking about the affordability aspect of this whole thing, there is a guideline of what is considered like a rental and what is the underneath the value, market value of what's called the affordability side of the equation, right? So part of that affordability side of the equation, you know, it's literally $50 less per month is called the affordable housing. For the rental side of the equation. Still, the concern is people are going into houses that are wrecking the places, and then we're footing the bill for this on a regular basis. That's my concern. So as you said, you know, some of these places are completely destroyed, $25,000 plus in damage, right? What are we going to do to prevent this? You know, putting more money into this program will not help. If the places are going to get destroyed, there's got to be some measurements and some checks and balances that, you know, the undesirable rentals that or people that go into this rental market that'll wreck the place, we can't continually absorb the repair bill for this. So what is put in place, you know, taking it to the rentalsmen, if there's any teeth on that side of the equation, or just saying, you know, this is a one and done type thing, you know, tighten up your rental policies prior to getting any money.
So through the chair, great point. Thank you for bringing this up. So it hits on something very important about, you know, what is the city's role in affordable housing, both building new, helping maintain the existing affordable housing stock, and how far do we go with it? Where does it become the province's issue or the federal government's issue, right? Or the community's issue, because that's also an option. In this case, the consideration that we're working with is, you know, we have the Housing Accelerator funds to work with for the moment, so we're not taking on any long-term burden from the city from this. So it's an opportunity for us to try out this new type of incentive stream, see how it works, see how it's useful. A critical aspect of the city's funding, though, is that it often enables housing providers to access funding from higher levels of government. So whether that's Saskatchewan Housing Corporation or CMHC or some of the other agencies like Federation of Canadian Municipalities has some funding programs for various things. So that's really a critical part where city contribution is important. Up until this point, the city has largely been focused on new housing construction. We did have that rental repair tax exemption for a while to fulfill the purpose that I'm describing here. But due to the quirks of, in particular, CMHC's programming, where typically they're looking at multi-unit buildings with at least 5 units in them. So an application where if you say have 5 single-family homes, they're not interested in doing a project like that. Typically they have long approval times because they're often providing their funding through loans, which means there's an underwriting process. They need to go find someone to provide that funding. So there's a mismatch between what they're providing and what housing providers need. So they needed something more responsive. A lot of the time too, it's, you know, sometimes you just need a couple $1,000s. Like you don't need to go and get a $100,000 loan for whatever project you're looking at. So I suppose you could say that's a fourth part of what this pilot is trying to achieve, is to fill that gap in the need. And then, as I mentioned before, come the end of 2026, we can evaluate if this is appropriate for the city to keep doing the long term, or if we want to take a different direction.
Yeah, I understand the fact they get a couple $1,000s, like, yeah, there's always going to be repair and maintenance. Like a couple $1,000s shouldn't even be open to this program. If you're looking at something for a couple $1,000s, that should be absorbed a part of your routine, regular maintenance cost. So a couple $1,000s is concerning. How many times are there going to be applications every time somebody moves out and needs some paint? It's open to the program. So you got this whole huge administration cost. Then the concern is specifically on their place where you have people going in and wrecking houses, period. That they have no consequences for their actions, They'll go to the private industry to rent a place. They'll get kicked out of that numerous times, go through this system. They'll come into this program here, keep on wrecking places, and it's either funded directly by the homeowner, rentals company or people, or it's going to be funded by the taxpayer. So at what point in time is this like a no? Like, is there checks and balances? So if you're going to a house and you're wrecking the place and you know, your name is John Smith and you have a tendency to wreck the place every time you've moved from place to place to place, sorry, John Smith, you're not renting anymore, period.
Sorry, Councillor Bizo, just to let you know, you only have like 14 seconds left. So in case you have something further.
So what checks and balances are in place to prevent this?
Certainly. Through the chair. There's two parts that I'd like to address in this really quick. So I apologize, I should have been more precise earlier. When I say they're coming forward asking for a few $1,000s, that's like less than $10,000, 5 to 10 in that range. So it's not extremely small repairs. Second, we would prioritize funding based off of a building condition assessment. We would channel the funding first to emergency repairs that are like a direct threat to, an immediate threat to the health and safety of occupants or the public around the building, then to more major repairs like, say, electrical systems that might cause a fire hazard, and then we have a hierarchy of things that we would address. So if someone is coming to us with a door that's been kicked in, that's something we would consider, but if someone's coming to us with, you know, as I mentioned, an electrical system, that's going to get addressed first. So that's the first part. Second part is a lot more complicated because you're right, there are tenants out there that will wreck a place on occasion or repeatedly, depending on their situation. A lot of this comes down to the need for appropriate housing. In this case, supportive housing in a lot of circumstances where you have people with maybe mental health issues or addictions or other issues going on where they just need extra support to be able to stay stably housed, to be able to exist in a unit over the long term and be without being pejorative, like a responsible tenant, a good tenant that you enjoy having in your building. That's a harder problem for us to address through this program. It's something that needs to be considered through the housing strategy that we'll be working on this year. Requires cooperating with community-based organizations that operate supportive housing, figuring out, you know, what do they need to build and operate more of this. And unfortunately, that comes down a lot of the time to the willingness of the province or the federal government to put up funding for that type of project. So we've had a couple projects in the last few years, the rapid housing streams that have brought more supportive housing online, so those have been good. We're not certain what the future of those streams looks like, but yeah, it's not a very good answer, I apologize. That's the one I have for you.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Well, you do still have, if you had another question, you still have, I think, 9 seconds, so if you do wish to ask another one, you can.
This could take more than 9 seconds to get it out.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Bizo. There's also the opportunity, if you wish to follow up individually with folks for further clarification. Okay, I see next Councillor Fro. Please go ahead.
Through the chair, I'll be brief. So I understand these incentives align with existing city policy and strategies, and I believe that those were structured to meet the demands as outlined in the housing needs assessment, largely that we're going to need another 14,000 homes or residents or units rather over 10 years. So, you know, with that in mind, is it fair to say that the housing incentive policies as presented are meant to support a range of living options, basically giving choice to community and the changing demographics of our city as opposed to one particular type of way of living? They're structured to support many different types of living.
Is that still you, Mr. Hurtis? Okay, 1 second. Go ahead.
Thank you, through the chair. Yes, the housing incentives policy is designed to do exactly what you've said. A key aspect of the policy is that it doesn't drive development necessarily, but it does help influence how much existing development that's going on or planned, how much of that is offered affordably. And in some cases, you know, to certain groups, whether it's Indigenous housing or housing for women and families, housing for seniors, there's a variety of groups that the projects can be oriented towards. In terms of, does it support a diversity of housing. Technically, yes, but not in the way that it incentivizes anything and everything. It incentivizes parts of the market that are just structurally undersupplied by the market. Like, the market's great at supplying new housing in greenfield, struggles a bit more for housing in existing areas of the cities, especially in, say, core neighborhoods. So we have increased the grant amounts to help make the finances on those types of projects work. Similarly, affordable housing, you know, investors in market projects, they want to see a return. And if you're not offering your project at market rents, it can be challenging to hit that investment while offering those affordability. So the Housing Incentives Program tries to fill that gap and bring those rents down while making the projects financially possible.
Councillor Fro, did you have something further? No? Okay. Councillor Rasevich, you'll be closing debate, so I'm going to go as you move the report. So if that's okay, we'll leave yours since you'll have the opportunity to close, okay? And so, Councillor Turnbull, you're next.
Yeah, to the chair, I was just wanted to ask more about only being eligible for the projects within city center, north central, and heritage neighborhoods, as opposed to throughout the city.
Certainly. So, through the chair, there's a few pieces to this. So the housing incentives policy is more, it's a suite of incentives for a variety of different things. In terms of the new incentives, the rental acquisition and repair incentive is not limited to the city center, but there's functional limitations on where it can apply, because we'd be looking at buildings that are at least 20 years old. So you'd be excluding probably most of Harbor Landing, though there may be exceptions, the Greens, the Towns, these newer areas that have built out in the last few decades. In terms of the pre-development grants, that one is also available to nonprofits citywide. We had initially planned that this one too would only be available to nonprofits, but when we went out and engaged with the nonprofit organizations and other stakeholders, there wasn't as much interest in the pre-development grants, and so we retooled it, keeping in mind our goals under the Housing Accelerator Fund to spur more housing construction. We did open it up to private developers on a limited basis, and we did want to prioritize that funding within the city center, north central, and heritage, because those have been identified as priority areas in the policy.
To the chair, so it does say under the pre-development grant, private developers only eligible within those three regions. So I would say within Ward 5, there would be homes or properties which could benefit from this, but they are not included.
Through the chair. Correct. It's the question of there's multiple places we could draw that line. In terms of program areas, I'm not sure if everyone's had a chance to look at the maps in the policy. We differentiated by city center as a group, north central and heritage are another. Then we have all the areas within the intensification boundary, so the established areas of the city as of 2013, and then everything else beyond that is new areas. So in terms of where we prioritize the funding for this, we probably wouldn't want to direct it towards that area 4, the greenfield areas, because those are new market-based projects frequently. It should be relatively known what a lot of the costs of doing that work are based off of other projects that are going on. Perhaps there's an argument for expanding it to the entire intensification area. The risk with that is we dilute investment from the areas that we have identified as a priority.
So to the chair, since it's private developers, what would be the repercussions if we did include further? For example, I'm not talking about new areas, but areas such as Glencairn, which could have some properties that could benefit from this. And it says private developers, would that not be their cost?
Through the chair. Yes, I'm thinking quickly through the implications of expanding it out to the intensification area. We might want a few days to take that one away and fully examine the implications of it. As I mentioned before, the primary trade-off we were looking at is really targeting the funding to the areas of the city where which really need investment, where we've prioritized for investment.
Yeah, and I guess the question would be, since it says private developers, and yeah, I would encourage that to be expanded for users such as some of the ones on my ward to be able to use, and it's going to be more homework for us to work on in the next week.
Okay.
Thank you, Councillor Trimble. Okay. Councillor Sickles, please go ahead.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. Just a clarification, maybe I missed it. Are condo corps, who I think are registered with ISC, are they non-profit condo corporations?
Through the chair. Complicated question, and they can be. So in this case, if the corporation that is established as like a cooperative or a membership nonprofit, then in those circumstances, they could be considered eligible for something like this. To my knowledge, we don't have a lot of them in the city. I can't think of any particular examples off the top of my head.
No further questions.
Thank you, Councillor Sickles. Okay, Councillor Rasevich, thank you for patiently waiting. I don't, but just to be clear, he'll be closing debate. So if there is anybody else who has a question, please turn your mic on, because Councillor Rasevich will be wrapping things up for us. Please go ahead, Councillor Rasevich.
Through the chair, just talking about basement suites and backyard suites, is that limited to certain areas?
Certainly, through the chair. The current incentive as it stands applies within that intensification boundary. So we don't provide tax exemptions for secondary suites that are built in greenfield areas. The changes that are recommended today would change that up a little bit. So for private homeowners, eligibility would remain within that intensification area, the core neighborhoods, basically the same as the existing policy. It would allow us, though, to consider projects where, say, you have a nonprofit building in a greenfield area and they want to, say, build a duplex that each has a secondary suite to achieve those 4 units, right? This would now allow us to consider that type of development, whereas the policy as it was structured before wouldn't have necessarily allowed us to provide incentives in that circumstance.
And I guess the next question I got is, do we look at limiting per neighborhood how many, you know, secondary suites you're going to have, whether it's a basement or a garage or in the backyard? I mean, I just think there probably should be, I would think, some limits on how many of those you're putting in neighborhoods as well, you know, which relates, you know, do we have limits? Have we looked at that?
I might ask Ms. Dawson to take this one.
Ms. Dawson, go ahead, please.
Sorry, can I ask the councillor to repeat the question?
The question was, do we have any limitations on the number of secondary suites, whether it's basement or in the backyard, like a garage, per neighborhood? Because, you know, on my street, for example, I don't know if I'd want, like, you know, 10 or 15 secondary suites in my neighborhood.
Yeah, through you, Chair. Great question, and thank you for it. As of right now, any property that has a single home on it can include a basement suite on the property. And in amendments, I think in 2023, it was extended to backyard suites. And then through some of the amendments that were done last year around this time, we extended it to include 4 units as of right on properties that are within the intensification boundary. So there's a boundary, and then in greenfield areas can have up to 2 units per property. So that can be a duplex, that can be a secondary suite, a backyard suite, and a home. So it can be any combination that fits within the parameters or the box on the property.
Yeah. So basically, I guess if everybody in my neighborhood wanted to put a secondary suite in the backyard, he could.
Yes, yes, everybody's entitled to that.
Huh. Okay. I think that's something that potentially should be, I mean, not that that's happening, but if it's things like that start happening more, affecting neighborhoods, just something to keep in mind, I would suppose. That's all.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Rasevich. I will ask the clerk to start the vote.
Members of Executive Committee, the motion has passed in a vote of 8-2. Those in favor of the motion were Councillors Burton, Rashevich, Turnbull, Flores, Fro, Radens, Mayor Bashinsky, and Councillor Zakidniak. Voting against were Councillors Bezo and Seekless.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. We will now consider item EX 25-4 Office to Residential Incentive Pilot. I will ask City Manager Nikki Anderson to please introduce the report.
Through the chair, encouraging office conversions was part of the city's action plan through the Housing Accelerator Fund. This report is recommending using $4 million of the city's half funding to pilot an incentive that provides capital grants to convert office space into residential housing units in Regina City Centre. This work stems from Regina participating in a national study through the Canadian Urban Institute called the Case for Conversions. That study investigated the opportunity of converting downtown office space into residential housing units to increase housing supply and revitalize downtowns that were deeply impacted by COVID-19. Revitalizing Regina's downtown has been an ongoing priority for the city, and investing in office space conversions has several other benefits, including increasing downtown residential development, utilizing existing building inventory, increasing residential density in the downtown area, ensuring residents have walkable access to employment opportunities, community services and facilities, amenities, and citywide transit services, strengthening the office space market by reducing vacancies in Class B or Class C office space through conversions into residential housing units, and fulfilling Regina's Housing Accelerator Fund commitment with CMHC and the federal government. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Anderson. Can I have someone move this report? You can press your button if you'd like to move it, or raise your hand. Someone please move the report. Councillor Rastovich, thank you. Did you wish to ask any questions? No? Okay, thank you. I'm not seeing any questions. Now I am. Looks like that is Councillor Burton. Please go ahead.
So, office building to converted to residential, good idea and stuff like that. Is there any incentives that are planned to help get some new apartment buildings downtown? We haven't seen a crane in years. Capital Point failed, and so conversion is something we can do, but is there anything coming, thought of, somewhere people are kind of trying to see what we can do to, if we want to have some densification, downtown might be a good place that I would support rather than some other areas.
Mr. Nair, I see your hand raised. Please go ahead.
Through you, Chair, the Chair. Councillor, yes, this is actually going to be part of the work when we look at doing our housing strategy, and we'll be looking at all areas of the city. And so we'll be looking at other jurisdictions, what they found successful, what programs would be probably of the most value here. So it will be part of our work going forward, looking at how potentially we either may incentivize or help people who are looking at doing developments downtown for residential development. But that will be part of our housing strategy work.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Burton. I don't see any others with indicating they wish to speak. I will ask Councillor Rasovich if you do wish to close debate. Yes? Okay, go ahead.
So, through the chair, in your opinion, for downtown, why haven't we had, do you think any buildings going up downtown? Is it just the cost of a concrete high-rise, I guess? I just want to know what your thoughts are.
Mr. Nair? Go
Yes,
ahead.
through the chair. There are a number of factors that play into it, and really the best guides we've had is conversations we've had with the people who occupy that space in the market. And their feedback to us has been if they saw demand for it, they would definitely explore building it. So currently, the feedback we're getting from those on the front line of that kind of development, they're saying there currently isn't the demand. So that's primarily the reason.
Okay, that makes sense.
Oh, okay. Mr. Sleva, please go
Sure,
ahead.
through the chair, one point I may add, demand can be a complicated factor. We had similar conversations with the city of Saskatoon 10 years ago. Nobody wants to live downtown, nobody wants to live downtown, what are we doing? They had one successful condo project go forward at River Landing at the southern edge of downtown, and now they're in a building boom. It took one project to kind of prove the market, prove there was demand. So I think that we would anticipate something similar here, that it might take a market leader, or it might take somebody to take that risk, but you know, a big project, you're right, would have significant costs, and with that there's significant risk. Nobody wants to be the person to bet and lose, but we did see with the city of Saskatoon, somebody bet and won big, and now everybody is also betting on downtown Saskatoon, and they have built a substantial volume of condo units and apartment units within the city center since the success of River Landing. So as part of the housing strategy, you know, we will be having those conversations with the developers in Saskatoon about what worked, what didn't work, what was the turning point, why has Saskatoon seen success and not Regina, and what does Regina have to do to replicate that success?
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Rasevich. I will ask the clerk to start the vote.
Deputy Mayor, the motion passes 10-0 with all members present voting in favor.
Thank you, clerk. We will now consider item EX 25-5, tax title sales. Again, I will ask Ms. Anderson to introduce the report.
Through the chair, this report is asking City Council to approve the sale of 4 of the 21 properties we recently obtained under the Tax Enforcement Act. This report is also asking for some minor bylaw changes that improve efficiency for administration. To ensure appropriate ongoing council oversight, if these bylaw changes are approved, administration must still act in accordance with City Council's bylaw that requires administration to get council approval to sell a property at below market value and where the sale does not cover tax arrears and fees. The Tax Act requires that if we sell a property, we can retain the tax arrears, and everything over fair market value goes back to the original landowner. Therefore, when the city sells these properties, at the very least, we want to recoup outstanding tax arrears, which removes the amount owing from our bad debt account. Of the 21 properties, we are holding on to 12 for consideration in the North Central Land Bank. We offered 9 properties for sale. We recommend accepting 4. The other 5, 2 properties didn't receive offers, and 3 of them received offers below what we believe is an acceptable amount. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Anderson. Can I have someone move this report? Okay, Councillor Sickles, I saw your hand first. Do you have any questions?
I do not.
Okay, thank you. Okay, who I see next is Councillor Burton. Please go ahead.
So the amount of outstanding taxes is covered and the remainder given back for the seeds here. Do we tack on any fees as well as a result of us having to take the lot and deal with it and sell it? And
Who would like Mr. Jedlick? Maybe, Mr. Jedlick? Okay, I will turn your mic on. Thank you.
Through the chair, yes, we are able to recover any sort of maintenance costs associated with taking care of the lot prior to the sale. If there's demolition costs on a house, we're able to tack that on as well. And then there's also penalties associated with the property being in tax arrears.
So our administrative, through the chair, our administrative costs are covered then as well?
Not necessarily any salary related to administration's time. That is not recovered.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Burton. Councillor Rastovich, please go ahead.
Yeah, through the chair, just off Councillor Burton's question, legal costs?
Sorry, Mr. Jedlick, is that
Those
you
covered?
again? Go ahead.
Through the chair, our legal costs are generally internal salary costs, and I don't believe that we look to recover any of those. But if there are transfer costs or closing costs or anything like external costs, we would be able to recover those.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rastovich. I don't see further questions. I do have one. Ms. Anderson, you had noted that there's some properties in North Central. The 12 of the properties are being considered for inclusion in the community land bank. Could you just expand on that a bit further for folks, just in general? Perhaps just expand on what that process entails. What are the next steps? What is a community land bank? So who would like to take that? Okay, Mr. Nair, please go ahead.
Yes, through you. There are a number of considerations now that we've started working our plan towards the North Central revitalization. So our first step is to look at the properties, analyze what might be the highest and best use for them, the ones that may provide the greatest opportunity for redevelopment. And so our next step is to look at these properties, make some decisions on them. If they're found not to be suitable, then they could potentially go to sale. But we want to make sure that we have first right of refusal within these properties to make sure that they can be part of our overall revitalization plan.
Thank you. Okay, Councillor Rastovich, please go ahead.
Okay, just, I guess based on North Central, and you're looking at these properties, and so you mentioned demolition, that would be covered. You know, I'm just thinking about, you know, are we looking at some of these places that are boarded up, et cetera? Are we looking at, you know, actually doing a demolition so that people aren't, you know, setting them on fire or creating, you know, people feel unsafe, you know, because people are, you know, housing in there, like a model like in Detroit, for example. You know, that was part of a reason why, I guess, you know, Detroit, that's what they did. They demolitioned all these houses that were boarded up, so it made the neighborhood feel safer. Yeah.
Okay, Mr. Nair, please go ahead.
Yes, through the chair. Definitely that is part of the consideration. When we look at a property, there was sort of two assessments we can make. If in fact there is no potential for redevelopment, then for sure we would look at demolishing it, and it would generally just provided you're correct, a safer environment, not to have that there would be anyone that would be staying there illegally. If there is an opportunity to redevelop the house and it makes a lot of sense, then we would look at securing the property and making sure that it prevents sort of illegal access or any potential damage to it. So I want to make sure that we don't completely write off all properties that we take, and if there's value to doing some reconstruction through a number of programs, we would definitely look at that.
Okay. So that is in process. We're actually we're actually doing that? Are we actually moving ahead with all that right now?
Yes, through the chair. We are just starting this work, and so we are developing the matrix and the resources to look at and determine that. So now that we know what properties are included, we have someone that within our team that's going out and looking and assessing them. And so based on his assessment, we'll decide whether we want to in fact retain it as is and rebuild it, or whether in fact it's best to demolish it and clean the site up.
Yeah, I guess one more question would be, there could be owners who probably are paying their taxes, and I'm not sure about this, maybe you guys know, but are there houses that are boarded up that are still owned by owners that are just holding these houses, and they're sitting there, you know, in terrible shape, and it's, you know, which could potentially become, you know, part of the problem. Could be, I guess, we call those delinquent properties, so, you know, to get that owner to get moving either to demolition it, so that it doesn't become a, you know, where people squat, I guess, in those houses?
Mr. Jedlick, please go ahead.
Through the chair, the majority of the properties that we're actually enforcing on now are properties where previously bylaw has gone in and actually enforced on a demolition. And then the cost of that demolition is added to their to tax arrears on the property, and that's usually when it falls into arrears with the city, and that's when we run it through the tax enforcement process and then acquire ownership of the parcel. And so we aren't necessarily out purchasing properties that have homes on them. Generally, when they come to us, they're already a vacant lot that's fallen through arrears. There are a couple of examples though right now where there's a structure that is likely to be enforced on, but I think we'll start entering into discussions with the owners, because if we demolish it and then the structure is lost, that might not be the best process forward. So we're examining some different ways of maybe taking these properties. Prior to the North Central revitalization motion, standard practice was when a property came in through tax arrears or tax enforcement, it was immediately put out and sold. And so this is a new direction within the boundaries of that North Central community to retain title to lots and look at them as redevelopment sites.
Thank you.
Did you have anything further? Okay, thank you. Okay, Councillor Flores, please go ahead.
Thank you. Through the chair, there was a mention alongside Councillor Rasovich's questions in regarding to securing the properties that are considered for redevelopment, which I think it's, if it's housing that can be redeveloped and put back to be usable is great, but what kind of timelines do you have when a house falls into that redevelopment process as opposed to a demolition? And how long would it stay? And what does securing it mean? Is it just more boarded up? Just paint me a picture of what that looks like.
Mr. Jedlick, please go ahead.
Through the chair, as it stands right now, we don't have any properties with structures on them. The properties that we have are all vacant lots. And so one of the things that we do undertake is ensuring that the lots are maintained. So sidewalks continue to get shoveled. They're free of litter and debris. They're mowed in the summertime. And so we do track those maintenance costs to ensure that they're not a sort of a blight on the community. If we were to, enter into a situation where we were to acquire a lot with a property on, or a structure on it, and then I think we would take sort of all the typical commercial steps that you would to ensure that it, keep people out of it so that it doesn't fall into, a place where people are squatting.
So as time passes, would all those costs be then passed on to the owner? Or do we absorb those costs after we've decided to redevelop?
Through the chair. So thank you for the question, because it's an opportunity to clarify. The costs that are incurred, generally, we will not recover all of them. And that's when you'll see there's a bad debt expense that we ask to be written off. Because the reality of a vacant lot is, maybe worth, $10,000. And some of the arrears that you'll see will be built up on these properties are, $50,000, right? And we could sit and hold on to it and say, well, we're not going to sell this till we recover that full 50,000, but then we'd be sitting on that property forever. And so when there's a difference between the market value and what it can be sold for and the arrears, then that difference is when we do enter into a sale, we ask for that to be written off.
Thank you. No further questions? Thank you, Councillor Flores. Councillor Bizo, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Through the chair of specifically 1355 St. John Street, commercial property located just north of the tracks. The neighboring value of the tax is about $8,000 a year. What happened that this particular property has $1 million in arrears versus the whole process taking a lot less time, it seems like, for the rest of the properties that are in question for the arrears?
Who is that, Mr. Jedlik again? Please go ahead.
Through the chair, it's a good question, and so we offer a little bit more information that's not included directly in the report. What oftentimes will happen is there's the actual arrears and then there's penalties that will be added on because the taxes haven't been paid. And so on that particular lot where there's approximately $1 million in arrears listed, it's actually $75,000 in taxes, $955,000 in penalties, and about $1,000 in maintenance. And I'm not sure if there's anything more you want to add to that, Ms. Mills.
Great. Ms. Mills, please go ahead.
I can add some context there. I think the question was in terms of why did the tax enforcement take so long on that property? And I'd say that on that property specifically, there was some information provided to previous administrations and councils where there was not a desire to move forward with tax enforcement. And then in 2023, we had some conversations and decided that it was the best thing to do is to proceed with us to take title to that property at that time, recognizing that that expense was significantly related to the compounding penalty that just had compounded significantly over time.
Did you have anything?
No, the penalties are one thing. It's $1 million of taxation. Backholing is one thing, but it seems like it's a penalty charge.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Bizo. I don't see others wishing to speak. Councillor Sickleys, do you wish to close debate?
Yes, I do.
Okay, please, do you have anything further?
I do not.
Do not? Okay, thank you. I will ask the clerk to start the vote. Thank you.
Deputy Mayor, the motion passes 10-0 with all members present voting in favor.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Our last item on the public agenda is the EX 25-6 Speaker's Corner Drainage Renewal Project. I will again ask City Manager Nikki Anderson to please introduce the report.
Thank you, through the chair. We had a storm pipe failure at Harrington Mews in June of 2023, so plain language, a big sinkhole. We had a temporary solution. We have a temporary solution, and we need to move towards a permanent solution. So there's a $15 million budgeted amount out of the Utility Capital Fund for the permanent solution. Generally on these types of projects of these size, approximately 10 to 15% is needed for consulting services, meaning that for this project, consulting costs would exceed $750,000. Administration has to come to council for approval on awarding these sorts of contracts if it exceeds $750,000. This report is asking for authorization for administration to exceed that amount, provided that the total project stays within the budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Anderson. Can I please have someone move the report? Councillor Burton, do you have questions then that you wish to ask? Okay. If anyone has questions, please, there we go. I see Councillor Turnbull. Please go ahead. Or sorry, one sec. I'm just trying to get your mic turned on. I don't know why it's not working. There we go. Go ahead, please.
I just have a question about that 10 to 15% consultant fee estimate. And based on your historical processes of doing that with an RFP, I just know historically from being in the industry, it's never been 15%. So what does that range from?
Where should I send that to? Mr. Doney, please go ahead.
Through the chair. So typically what we find is that if we're doing a new construction with everything is known, it would be 10% or less. But when we get into underground construction and we have a lot of unknowns, that cost can increase up towards 15% based on our past experience.
To the chair, well, that would be the construction cost, but this is the percentage of the consultant fees, so it would reflect the budget item. So the percentage would reflect the scope of the work, and if you were to look at the guideline for fees from the SSA, from the Saskatchewan Architects Association or engineering, it has it all outlined, and typically they come in under with the RFQ process. So I'm just wondering where the 10 to 15 comes from.
Through the chair, yeah, our 10 to 15% is just based on past practices or history. Yes, the construction costs may escalate if you have undergrounds unknowns, but the consulting costs typically would also escalate. So if they have to redesign something because a pipe wasn't in our GIS system, for example, those costs can increase. So it's just a range. It's at the upper range, and we don't plan to go there, but that is an estimate for council to be aware of.
To the chair, do we have a matrix or history or of our typical percentage of consultant costs per project based on our experience in capital building and tenders and things?
Through the chair, so based on the experience, we see the consulting costs being in that 10%, 10 to 15%, yeah.
To 10.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I can leave the rest for an email.
Thank you, Councillor Turnbull. Councillor Sickleys, please go ahead. Or sorry, there we go. Go ahead, please.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. I know it's very difficult for me to sit here and ask you, can you guarantee this will be done in 2025? But I think that's the underlying question here. You're asking for the approval to do it now because it'll be cheaper than doing it next year. So what can you tell us that'll make us feel comfortable that you have someone ready to go with the equipment and the materials as soon as the thaw comes?
Through the chair, great question, and it gives me an opportunity to provide some context. So what you're approving right now is to expand the consulting fees. So we're still in design phase. 2025 construction is definitely at risk because we're still designing right now. So we do plan to do construction in 2025, but we're also working with PCC on permits. And so their board is not established yet. Of course, we've got a rep from the City Council here that will be hopefully approved by Cabinet this sometime in the near future, but we've had lots of conversations with PCC, and there are risks for permit being issued based on the work that has to happen there. So we're still working towards 2025, but it will not be complete in 2025. We've got two different projects that are being designed right now. One is on Hamilton Street going down to Wascana Lake, and another one is likely going to be going to the west down 19th and then Angus. So that one will be into 2026 for sure.
Thank you for the honesty. So we're looking at next year, at best. Well, hopefully not 2027. I know that it's our pipe and it's our pump. Is there any way that the province can help us with this thing?
Through the chair, thanks for the question. I have had conversations with PCC, the executive director, recently, and she's reiterated that because it's our infrastructure that we're responsible to repair that infrastructure and replace it. But there is an opportunity that if we're going to beautify the park, that through the design process, there may be some opportunity to cost share on that aspect. So a very small portion of the project, but that is a possibility. They'll be coming forward on February 5th to council to share their budget, and so that may be a good conversation between council and PCC at that time.
Okay, thank you. Through you, Chair, I forgot to say that last time, sorry. So we're waiting on the Capital Commission with respect to plans. So they do have a stake in this, yet they don't want to take a financial stake in this. So we're paying for any delays of their plan portion. How big of a delay is that, and what's that worth?
Through the chair, we are working through the design process now, and we will be waiting on the board to make a decision to approve it from a regulatory perspective. So they have a regulator in the PCC is the regulator for Wascana Park and area. And so we don't, if we can get those approvals done within the next couple months, I don't see a substantial cost and delays because it'll be 2025 and 2026 construction. But I'm just highlighting that that is a risk for 2025 construction.
Okay, I can't find any other point to make here, so I wish you the best. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sickles. That opened up some more questions, it seems. Councillor Bizo, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you through the chair. Do we have the scope of this defined? Is this kind of more the replacement in kind? And what happens if we say if this project's not ready to go for until 2026? Go ahead and do some engineering up to that point of, you know, spending this $750 and come back to see where you get with it.
Through the chair, so this is not a typical project. This is an emergency response to something that failed. We are getting the scope pretty well defined, and we've determined after the budget has been set, because we obviously came to council in December for that advance approval, that we're going to have two different drainage projects because of the amount of water that comes. So we are very confident that we'll be moving forward with one pipe from College in Hamilton to the south into Wascana Lake, and so that'll take the wet weather flows, it'll surcharge in that pipe and go into Wascana Lake. And the second portion of the project we're still working through, likely we're going to be going from around Speaker's Corner, probably to the north a little bit, to the west along 19th Avenue, and then to the south down Angus Boulevard. But that part is still being investigated. We have a lot of significant underground infrastructure along 19th Avenue, so we have to see if we can work around that and move some other large diameter pipes to make it all fit. So that's the scope of the work from a design and construction perspective, but this is more fluid than typically where we would kind of have pre-design all laid out and things planned out much further in advance than what we are right now for 2025 construction.
So we're into kind of like two projects, like 1 in 500 year flood event is what we're looking at for this, and so it triggered two projects then?
Through the chair, yeah. So we are designing towards a 1 in 100 year storm event typically, yeah, because of the volume of flow that we're seeing, we're going to have it go two different directions. So the normal flow would be down that 19th Avenue and Angus Boulevard, but it'll surcharge when we have a large weather event down the Hamilton pipe.
Okay.
Anything further, Councillor Bizo? Okay, thank you. Excuse me. Okay, I do see Councillor Turnbull. Please go ahead.
Okay, just reading through this. So phase 1 was awarded through the open competition, and it looks like, and you confirmed that phase 2 and 3 are the intent to go with the same firm with a negotiated price. So would there be cost benefits to going back to request for proposal to get closer to that 10% versus the 15% since this isn't for tender anymore?
Yeah. Through the chair. So typically when we have put out RFPs, we put it out with initial scope of work that we know has to happen, which is phase 1, but we contemplate phase 2 and phase 3, and it'll be negotiated at that time. So we did consider putting it back out to tender. We think that will have significant delays in the project, and we will not do any construction in 2025 for sure. So probably a 2 to 3 month delay in the design process, and we wouldn't expect significant cost savings. Yes, it'll be competitively tendered, but the other consultants would have to put a fair bit of work into getting up to speed on what has happened. So typically we find the best approach to make sure projects stay on schedule and have a reasonable budget is to continue with the same consultant if we're getting the services that we expect.
To the chair. So to understand, you had some, when you awarded the phase 1, you did some negotiations for future phases of work to ensure good pricing for phase 2 and phase 3 in advance?
Yeah, through the chair, yeah. So typically we would have unit rates in place for expansion of scope, and so whether it's hourly rates or services in the field, that would be contemplated, and we'd expect future costs for phase 2 and phase 3 to be based on the unit rates of phase 1.
Okay. And so since this has already been negotiated, you would know what the percentage, is it closer to the 10 or the 15 or?
Through the chair, we haven't completed costs for phase 2 and phase 3 yet because obviously we're asking for approval to move forward with that now. So we don't have the total percentage, and we don't actually know the percentage of construction. So we're estimating 15 million. I will flag that this is a project that has come together quickly, and if we need more than that, we'd be coming back to council to have a conversation about how we can deliver it appropriately.
To the chair, thank you for your due diligence in answering my questions.
Thank you, Councillor Turnbull. Councillor Bizo, you have further questions?
Yeah, one further question. Thank you for that information. And through the chair, since this is, I'm going to say, an emergency repair of the pipe that broke, and then it kind of went into a bigger project of the 1 in 500-year flood event, can we just break this apart and call it Project A, emergency repair, Project 2, or get it off this book and say, this is a bigger scope, this is a bigger risk, we need to scope this properly, design this properly, do everything properly, instead of coming saying, you know, we need $15 million, what we think right now, which could be bigger, could be smaller, but could we just focus on the one project being the pipe repair, and then put the other one out in the future, do the proper engineering, evaluations, budgeting, and come back with an actual number for the trigger and the secondary project?
Yep. Through the chair, I'll provide you a bit more context of the project. So we kind of did that where we did the emergency repairs in July of 2023. So we installed this pit and put the pumps in place, and the existing pipe in place, we were looking through that to see if we could repair it, and we determined that we couldn't repair it based on how close it is to individuals' backyards and the street, so there wasn't space to get in there and actually repair the pipe. So that pipe, because we didn't want to have further expansion of the sinkhole, was actually blocked off and filled with expandable concrete. So that pipe has been abandoned. So our next steps now is to figure out how do we move forward and have a permanent solution in place. And that permanent solution is looking like those two options that I'd outlined right now. So we've been doing that for the last 6 to 8 months or so, getting those permanent solutions in place. The reason why I'm a little bit hesitant on the overall cost is just because we're here right now, still in the design phase. And so normally design would be progressed much further when we're asking for budgets. And the reason we're here is because we know we're going to exceed $750,000 for consulting costs, and that's what's triggered the conversation and council's decision.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Bizo. Anything further?
Oh, that's good, Pam.
Okay, thank you. So I don't see other folks with their hands raised. Councillor Burton, you had moved the report. Is there anything that you wish to? Okay, you're good. Thank you. I will ask the clerk to call the vote.
You need to vote. Okay.
I'm having a George moment. Sandy is going.
Deputy Mayor, the motion passes 10-0.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Can I have someone move a motion for private session? Okay, Councillor Sickles. I will call the question. Any opposed? Carried.
Just tell them we'll convene at 1 o'clock.
We will now be taking our lunch break, so we will be reconvening at 1 o'clock.